Hello, everybody. Argentina loves Blender. Oh, thank you, Pablo. Thank you. Thanks for watching. Let's introduce myself. I am Sybren. I am Blender developer. And I am here with Kevin, who had some questions about how to do stuff in the Blender code. So we're together, and I will first go over the setup of my machine and how I set up my IDE. You can already see it now, Visual Studio Code. And from there, we'll see if we can get to the graph editor and see how it's drawn and maybe change something or do something else fun. Let me put this window over there. Hey, Jan Willem and Volk. Good to see you guys. So, let's start on my shell. I'm using the fish shell, and I will paste a link here. I'll also put it in a comment or in the description or something with my configuration for the shell, because I'm using quite a few different aliases. So, for example, I type mm, and that will make master and do all kinds of stuff. Kevin, by the way, can you talk? And can we see if people hear you?
Do people hear me? I think there's a little bit of a delay between the stream and our communication, Sybren.
Yeah, I think so.
Yep.
So we'll see some responses on the... Oh, it sounds fine.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah. Okay.
Excellent,
Wonderful.
excellent. It took like...
Thank y'all.
Phone and iPad and computers and everything to set it up, but glad to hear it's working. So Kevin, first you asked about my personal setup of Blender.
Yes, please.
So basically I always work in a subdirectory of my home directory called Workspace, and inside that I have a Blender Git directory which contains all kinds of stuff. Is the font readable, by the way, on the stream? I can make it a bit bigger for people on mobile phones. So most important directories that you see here are Blender itself. I have a bunch of build directories in there. The manual is also important. The lib directory, which contains the precompiled libraries. So inside of Blender, we have just a clone of the Git repository, mingled in with some temporary files that always stick around. And I have build Linux, which is the build directory. So you can start by typing make developer, I think, to set this all up. And once you have it, what I usually do is when I want to change some configuration, I just open CMake cache, and then I can turn on and off certain things. Like I generally work without cycles, and I work without a whole bunch of other things, because for animation and rigging, I don't really need cycles, so I won't spend any time building it either anyway. I use Ninja as my build tool. So here I can type Ninja, but because CDing to the right directory and running Ninja then is too much work, usually I just do BB, which is my alias for go into the build Linux directory and run Ninja. I get a question, do you use symlinks for lib? No, I don't. I could. Yeah, you could use it to quickly switch between libraries, but I don't really. It's a good idea though. But it may also be tricky with the whole make update, because make update also sees that you are in a release branch and then switches branches on SVN to that release branch. I don't know how that would play together. So what I did is I have my own aliases, MR for make release, which will then I will not go through with it, but it will just check out the release branch of Blender and pull it in and make the updates and do everything for me. And then when I want to go back to master, I can do and then it goes back to master.
Sorry, Sybren, what is Ninja doing? What is Ninja doing?
Ninja is a build tool. So
okay.
It's kind of like Make, except that it's less verbose. So as you can see, this line here that I'm highlighting now, it just keeps updating that one line instead of just scrolling everything on your screen, which means that these kind of warnings actually stand out instead of scroll past. You can type make developer Ninja in your initial setup, and then Blender will automatically configure your build system to use Ninja. Make developer is not in the convenience targets. Help output from make. Yeah. Oh, and what are the requirements a person needs to join as a Blender developer? Well, there are no requirements really, because you can always start by sending in patches. So if you can, as Falk says, just start coding. Anyway, let's continue with this setup. So I use Ninja for building, also because it automatically detects how many CPUs you have, how many threads it can run. It just, it requires less brain to use it.
Sounds right for me.
Yeah, exactly. So I use Visual Studio Code for my IDE. I use very little setup. I just open the Blender source directory as with like file. It opens on another monitor with file and then open folder. I have a few extensions, but like the most important ones are the C++ and the CMake support, Clang format for automatic formatting. Oh, I love that. Ever since it hasn't been in Blender that long, but I really love the auto formatting that we have now because again, you don't have to think about anything. You just save, it reformats. So that is roughly my setup. I have a few config tricks here. We'll see how that works in practice in a while. So you wanted to know, Kevin, how you change things in the graph editor.
That's right.
So here you have the source code of Blender. Everything's in source, and then creator is the main function that is in there.
Yep.
And there used to be a separate directory there for the game engine, but that was removed with Blender 2.8. So pretty much all of Blender, all the functionality is in here. And here you have another subdivision. Blend kernel is really like the core Blender stuff. Blend loader is for loading and saving blend files. Blend lib is like an even lower level library for dealing with lists and colors and that kind of thing. And editors is where we are going now. Because this is the level where, well, you can see already like geometry, animation, armature, all that kind of stuff is there. And space things are responsible for the drawing.
Okay.
So let's see, we have space graph, which is the graph editor. And you wanted to know about the drawing. So I guess it's in space draw, graph draw.c. I cheated, I already scrolled. So here we are. Stuff. Well, already see stuff, drawing. So here, I think there was an draw f-curve function somewhere. Oh, there you go. Draw f-curve active vertex, which is a fairly reasonable, recent addition to Blender. We used to have the concept of the active vertex, but it was only half implemented. So this is apparently the code that actually draws the stuff. So what you can see is that it gets an F curve and it gets the 2D view and it gets some position. I have no idea what the position is, but you can see that if it's the curve is not active or the active keyframe index indicates that there is no active keyframe, the code returns, does nothing. Otherwise, it computes where in that 2D view it would put the thing. And then if it's outside of the view, it will just do nothing because it doesn't have to be drawn. This is a bit of voodoo that determines whether the active keyframe is actually selected or not. And apparently when it's not selected, it's also not drawn as the active keyframe. I think it kind of makes sense because active is white and selected is orange. And you can't, there is no color for active but not selected. So it kind of behaves as if there is no active keyframe if it's not selected. And then you get the actual drawing code. So it says, I want to draw primitive points. I want to draw one of them. It sets a color from the theme so that you don't have to think about concrete colors here. You just say, I want to use the color for the active vertex. And then you say, draw me the point and end it. And that is how stuff is drawn.
So something that you and I had talked about in the last animation module meeting was there was some kind of discrepancy between the selection of a keyframe and it being active because that F curve panel, only was activated if you clicked on it. But if you did like box select or whatever over it, it wouldn't activate the F curve panel. Do you know in this code where I would start digging to fix that?
Okay. Well, we can do I think it's a great question. We can do a bit of a search because I say yes because I know where to start looking. I don't know exactly where this is. But what you can see here in this line is that there is a function that gets the active keyframe from an F curve, which tells me that the active keyframe is something that is stored on the F curve itself. So we can take a look in there. And then, you can just see the active keyframe index. It gets it from the F curve. It's just a field there. And
you just, to get to that function, you just clicked on it. It's something in Visual Studio Code?
Yeah, sorry. I control click on the function.
Yeah.
And that brings me to the implementation.
Yeah. Class. Okay.
I'm seeing some more chats. Which flavor of Linux? That's in the description. Is Kubuntu. I think Blender is no longer using immediate mode OpenGL. It just has these names in these functions. The auto git blame is Git Lens. And active versus selected is hell. I agree. Right, back to this. So the next code that you see, this here, it looks at whether that index is still valid. Because it just says the 5th keyframe is the active one. And
the 5th one?
Well, for example, say the active keyframe index is 5, then the one with index, like the 5th or 6th one, depending on how you count, is the active one. But when you delete keyframes, it could be that what was the index of the active one now is out of bounds because maybe the active one was the last one and something got deleted. So you have to check for it before you try to access stuff. So if it's no longer valid, it just returns, okay, there is no active keyframe. What it then does it check for selection? So it finds the best triple, which is how Blender internally calls a keyframe. It's just a point in a Bezier curve.
Mm-hmm.
And then another nice thing, every Bezier triple has F1, F2, F3, and it has some other things, 1, 2, 3. And it's called Bezier triple because it has 3 points. It has in the middle the actual point, and then on
Yep.
either side it has the handles.
Yep.
And so that is F1 is the left handle, F2 is the point, F3 is the right handle. And so if all the F stands for flags, so if all the flags combined have no selection at all, then it still returns, okay, we have no active keyframe. And this was very intentional because we thought it would be a really bad idea to have an active keyframe that is not selected. So this enforces that if the active keyframe is not selected, it just doesn't exist. There is no active keyframe. And if we survive after all of that checking, then we can return the active keyframe index. So I think when it comes to the problems that you described with the active keyframe not being there, even though there's stuff selected, this is not the code to look into, because I think this is perfectly in line with what we want.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, well, what we do have to look at is the things like box select, to ensure that when you box select, the active keyframe index is actually updated to something within that selection. So let's go to Blender. By the way, this was another, it went very quickly. What I did was BBB. It doesn't stand for Big Buck Bunny. It stands for Build, Blender, and Run Blender. I also have BBBD, which is build Blender in debug and then run it. Fairly recently, I added the open last command line argument, which will just open the last file you had edited before. So that alias BBB is actually CD to the build directory, run Ninja, and then CD back and run Blender -- open last.
Wow. A very customized.
Oh yeah,
it's very impressive. Yeah.
Yeah, it felt kind of useful for me because it's so often that I have to restart Blender because you make a change, you want to test it on the same file, and computers are computers. They should do the repetitive work, not us.
Yes.
Okay, so let's make a stupid animation.
Okay.
To do that. This is something developers do. Animator would never do this. But we have something animated at least. Let's store that in there. Now we want to do a box select. So the first thing I would do is go into the menu. Let me increase the interface size. There we go. We have box select. So of course I have developer extras enabled and the Python tooltips enabled. So now I see that the operator for this is bpyops graph.selectBox. Now this we can translate. So graph.selectBox, I press Ctrl+C. This copies the Python code. And in Visual Studio Code, I can just say search within source Blender. And then the trick is remove the bpyops and the remaining dot, change that to _OT_, and there we go. This is how operators are implemented in C. So there's a function that gets an operator type, which it has to fill in. And then it sets the name, the ID name, the description, which functions to call to do with various functions. And this is exactly maps to what you may know from Python already. So the invoke, the exec, the module function, etc.
Yes.
It can also declare properties, like whether it should include handles, access range. I saw people talking about this today in the Blender chat, in the module chat. I have no idea what it does. Doesn't really matter because we are at the graph select box code. Let's look at the exec function. Again, I just control click. This should actually do the selection. So it gets the editor data. Depending on the mode, it deselects some stuff. If it includes the hand, it checks whether it includes the handles. Yada yada yada. No. Box select graph key is here. I think this is the actual core of the function. So it before this it checks the operator properties and does some conversion to rectangles and sets some modes. Then it actually does something and it returns whether any key selection was changed. And then it checks whether it needs to select the curves themselves or maybe not. And then it's
Sybren, sorry.
Yeah.
Could I interrupt you for just a second? So if I was looking to make a change to this and I wanted to see what this code was getting in its variables, how could I mean, are there ways for me to print out, you know, like what's being selected by the rectangle or something like that before we, you know, do something else? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I can show you 2 ways.
Okay.
In the meantime, I'm seeing a question. The BBB, BBD, and such. No, that's my personal aliases. And you'll see that every Blender developer has their own aliases for this kind of stuff. Right. So one thing I like is color. So what I often do in this kind of stuff, it's just a printf. It's the simplest. %s, that will get the function name. And then we can say mode. I think it's an integer. It's a short. Yeah, fine. Mode stat. And maybe we also want to print the rect. There we go. That has a print as well. Too far. By the way, I'm using my mouse forward and backward keys on the side of the mouse to go back to where I was. So what I was saying with the color, we can just do this. And I have another tiny extension. I think it was wrap something. Anyway, I can do Ctrl-Shift-T. And now I can say, well, I want this in bright green. And then it puts all the escape codes around it to show it in bright green. I use that so much to have some syntax highlighting of my debug prints, especially when things get noisy and like it then like this kind of stuff. It's really nice to see your own. So now do BBB, and it builds, and it nags. Expect an int. Jesus. And then, of course, I have to type mode here, not just plan for putting mode there. So now, box select, clunk. There we have it. Nice and green, mode is 6. We'll have to look up what that means. And here you see the rectangle. And since we are selecting between frames 20 and 80 somewhere, I think these are in pixels. Because I do know that 2D view drawing code that we looked at earlier, it actually has some matrix remapping in there so that it actually has like time on units on the x-axis. So if you want to go to frame 20, you would actually just draw on axis 20.
Okay.
Is
And so I know that the include. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Were you done?
yeah, because that shows that we have the right code and we got stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know that include handles is something I just opened a bug for. Maybe we could look at that if we were, wanting to fix that bug in this code.
Sure.
Like just to see, maybe printing out like what include handles is when we use the redo panel. I don't know.
Let's see how far we can get.
Yeah.
By the way, one thing we haven't looked at yet is the actually setting the active index.
Yeah.
So we can go into the box select graph keys, because this guy also returns true when there was an actual change in the selection. So this guy at least knows that there was something changed. And I think that kind of knowledge is also what we need to be able to respond to any changes by setting the active keyframe. So let's just look how it works. Bunch of stuff, looping over the animation data. And this animation data is all the channels that you see in the animation data editors. So whether it's graph editor or dope sheet or whatever, it all works with the same kind of data. So this is looping over all the rows that we have. And it does some stuff by remapping with the NLA and that kind of stuff. And then it loops over the F-curves and it loops over keyframes, and it then, for every keyframe, it will call the select callback function. And then it says all key selection changed. That's cool. So let's take a look at this function. It's a keyframe edit function, which we get from the keyframes edit keyframe select, which is where the select mode goes into. And then depending on whether you want to add, subtract, invert, it gives you a different function for actually doing that selection. So let's go to the add, because that's the simplest one. And then it looks at whether handles are visible or not, because you shouldn't select what's invisible. Wow. Well, apparently it checks, and here it sets F2, the flags for point 2, that is the key itself.
Right.
Sets the select bit, and the same for the handles if it can do it. And here, if this whole thing is, I don't know, it just selects everything. So that's kind of nice. Then it has to know which keyframe it is in. like which F curve, sorry, it is in. If we're going to do this, if we're going to set the active keyframe index here, we need to know whether we have that information or not. So let's look here. It has the F curve that we're iterating over. That's good. It has the index of the current keyframe being iterated over. Look, this is exactly what we need. These two. So what we can do, just for shits and giggles, no. There. That should do it. And like, this is not the right way to do this, by the way. Like,
Okay.
It's just a quick slap hack to see if it's conceptually sound. But like, after this, we should have like there should be a whole analysis of where else is this function called. Which situations are handled then? Do they all need to set the active keyframe index?
Yeah.
All those kind of questions, and that is where these kind of changes become really, really hard to do because there's so much code that's intertwined. But just to give it a try. Box select there. Puff! And there you can see it's white, which means that this is active. And do this. No, it's not white. But why? Oh, of course, because the curve has to be active as well. So try again. No. 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 What? Let's try it with just one curve. This is weird. Well, that's developing for you.
Well, I was going to say that I feel like box select is rife for another look. It's got a lot of behavior that has been confusing to me.
There, now it is setting it correctly. See, it does set a lot of things.
So is that F-curve panel opening when you do that?
Yep.
When there's an active keyframe? Okay, but in the previous cases, I imagine it wouldn't have. Yeah, brought up that panel.
Yeah. And this is also, I think, what's going wrong. Because right now, we don't have an active F-curve. So we can set that index, but it doesn't activate that particular F-curve.
Yeah, and what's the reason for that? Why isn't box selecting the F-curve?
Good question. I don't know. Like, one of the things that we want to be really careful about is to like try to not mess up what artists did. So for example, when you box select objects, I don't think it changes what the active object is, because you can have it deselected and use the active object as a pivot point for the selected objects for some operation on that. So, but I think for F curves, it becomes less useful to have this distinction.
Right. I agree.
Also, this shouldn't be done at all. I should actually be using BKE F curve active keyframe set function. like that. Which in the end does the same thing, except that it does so a bit safer. Oh, no. It sets it based on the Behe point. No. We'll have to have more code for that. Now the question is, where does it store which of the F curves is active?
Mm-hmm.
And there we cannot do the same trick, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Here, because we have an enum of F curve flags. They're stored here in the F curve struct. I'm sure there's a flag here. Flags field, which has these bits set or not. The problem is you should only have one active F curve.
Mm-hmm.
But if we do the same trick that we did by just setting it as active here, I mean, we can do it. Then what you'll get is multiple active F curves.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea what that would look like.
Yeah, is that a problem? I guess.
Well, it's
yeah.
It kind of violates the principle of having one active thing in your list of things.
Mm-hmm.
Here.
However, you can have multiple selected things.
Yeah.
Okay, so active is singular.
Yeah. And you can see that now I select stuff and it goes bonkers.
Oh, I see.
I select all of these points and it only shows one F curve. And I think I know why. Because it has to be, the active one has to be drawn differently from the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
So that means the normal drawing code, when it sees an active one, it will skip it. And then the active drawing code will look for the first active F curve, then draw it. And once it's drawn, it will not continue looking at other F curves because there should only be one active. So it
could
won't...
Could we try showing the panel? I know it's called active keyframes, but could we try it as like selected keyframes? You know what I mean? Like where we're drawing the panel.
Well, then you hit a limitation of like more generally in Blender. Because all the properties that are shown there are from the active thing, active keyframe, active F curve, etc. So it knows which values to draw. If you do this whenever there's a selection, of course it becomes ambiguous which one you pick.
Right. Could it just be the active one? Could we have the active keyframe data be that, but we can have actually multiple selected and still show the panel?
Well, then but then you get back to the definition of what is the active keyframe.
Right. I guess just the last one or whatever, whatever Blender selects whenever you do like a box select of multiple keyframes or something.
Then let's see. We had that function active index, which gets it.
And I agree with you, Jan Willem, in that's multiple active F curves to assign modifiers is similar to what plugin Sybren's trying to help me make, which is being able to edit multiple keyframes simultaneously.
Yeah. So what we could try and hack just for the sake of it is look at the drawing code and then just allow it to loop, like to continue drawing whenever it hits that active curve. So so that at least we see what's going on.
Yeah.
We have graph draw. Yeah, this is for drawing the active keyframe that checks whether the curve is active and the current key is the active one. Yeah, this is drawing code. Yeah. Yeah. There we go. Yes. See? If the curve is active, it remembers that this is the active one and skips the drawing as normal. And then later...
Oh, that's what was causing that, singular F-curve draw.
And then if it's still the active one, if there is an active one, it will just draw it separately. So I can just remove the continue here.
This is a side note, but I also noticed that there in the code it says it does just when you start doing a box select, it deselects everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I found that was kind of unexpected.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't?
No, like it
depends. I thought I saw something like that in the code.
Yeah, like it depends on the mode. Like you can have mode set, and then you just get the new stuff. You can have mode extend, then
got it.
It adds it.
I see. Okay.
So by default, it would do what you expect. So now you can see our issue. We actually have multiple active F-curves, which should never happen. Each with a active keyframe.
Yes.
So yeah, that's what we got. We can see the things we want to see, which is like you can box select, and then we do get an active F-curve and active keyframe. But again, because there's multiple, we still don't know which one it is. Apparently that one. So this is not really a solution, but if we can somehow ensure that maybe we should keep track of the last keyframe that was selected somehow. And then in the end, after the whole box selecting is done, just mark that key, that F curve is active and that key is active. But I would even make it a little bit smarter, I think. Because if there is already an F curve active and one of its keys is already selected, we should not be touching what is the active key. Because that is also something that happens right now. Like this one is active, and if I box select more, then all of a sudden other things become active as well. Or even worse, if I select something else also on the same F-curve, then what is my active keyframe jumps, even though it was part of the box select already. So I think then in that case it should be maintained. But like these are why the things why it's so difficult to develop well. Like the concept of box select should just do this is very simple, and I agree with the concept, but like actually implementing it well is a bit hairy.
Yes.
But we've been going at this for 45 minutes already. So let's say this is a nice thing that we want to get into Blender. And that's fine. Let's do that. So what I would do now is first I run Git Gui, which is not a standard Git command, but it's a program that's often installed. It's installed on Windows with Git automatically. On Linux, you can do get install Git Gui or whatever command you use to install stuff. And it gives me an overview of which files I changed, what the changes are for that file, and then I can choose what to do with it. Like I can say, well, this entire file should go in, this is what was changed, staged for committing. But like this print statement here, I don't want it. That should not go into my patch. So what I can do is select this and say right-click Stage Lines for commit, and be very specific about this change I want in there, and this change I do not. And then for this the same. I don't want to comment it out continue. I just want to do stage line for change. There. Now what I would typically do is Ctrl J, which is, I think, here, commit revert changes. So if I confirm now, revert, everything that was not staged is now gone. And same here. So what I'm left with is just the changes that I want to commit. Now I quit again. I build Blender again because I've changed the code. I should test that it actually works. Yay. And then I check out a new branch. By that, git checkout -b branch name will create that branch and will also make it active. Check it out. Fix t xxxx. Or just animation. Let's do it. There, box select always ensure active key is set, just a short message. And then a little bit of an explanation. So, and here.
So sorry, Sybren, you're currently going through what it would take if we were going to be submitting this.
Yep.
As a task. Okay.
Yep. So this is just doing a commit on a separate branch, so that there's a nice distinction between what is part of this, what isn't. Typing the message. Usually you would explain a little bit more. But I don't want to take up too much time. Control Enter, quit. Now I have that committed.
And so that's going to go in whenever you submit this branch. Or sorry, not branch, but the, what am I trying to say, patch?
Yes.
Okay.
So I can check that it is indeed in there.
What is this that we're looking at? What is
this? Is Git K. It's another thing that is often used. It's also shipped with Git for Windows. On Linux, you can just install it. It's super simple, but it works quite well and it's fast. So this is part of the way that I actually work. Visual Studio Code also has a Git client in there. I use it for Git blame and the annotations that you've seen pop up, but not for actually committing things or to view branches and that kind of stuff. Aside from me liking these tools, it also makes it very uniform for me how I work with Git. Maybe one project I do with Visual Studio Code, maybe another I use Vim, maybe I use other tools, and regardless of the tools, my Git workflow is always the same. And I quite like that. So patches you can submit with Arc, which is short for Arcanist. It requires some install, but that is all described on the wiki. I don't think it works particularly well on Windows, if at all. But if you do your work on Linux, then it is a bit temperamental. You shouldn't push it too far, but for simpler things like this, where you have a branch branching off of the master branch that has just your change, then you can use this. So I can do arc diff. Then I get the message that I typed, the reviewers. What's your username on Fabricator?
I think it's Blastframe, BLASTFRAME. I believe that's what it is.
So I can type that here in the reviewers field. Subscribers, I could add more people as subscribers here. I write and I quit. And then it has sent it in. That's the patch.
It's quite easy.
And there we have it. And we have one Kevin Burke as a reviewer.
Yeah.
So now that I'm here, I can see the description. I can see the reviewers. I can go through the code. I can see the changes that we made. But ideally, I would go in and change the project tags. Include via Blender because it's for Blender, animation and rigging because it's for our module, and then I can click submit and it would also set that. So now here at the sidebar you can see that these tags are set. This also means that when you go to the animation and rigging project here in the code review menu, it will show up in the list of patches for this module. So for visibility of your patch, is really important that you do this tagging correctly. Sometimes people put the entire project as a reviewer. Technically you can, but it causes a lot of noise because everybody who is involved in the project will get emails about this particular patch. So generally it's not seen as a particularly nice thing, even though you can technically do that. So Kevin, now you can go in and you can say, well, you can click on a line, for example, and say, well, this is using the BKE API for this. And you can save a draft, and then you can see, well, your name would be in here with when you type it like this done checkbox wouldn't be done. And then in the end, you can say, no, your menu would say show, accept or reject. You can say request changes. That is what it says. It doesn't reject. And then you submit, and then it will come back to me with the note. I can address it. So let's do that, because the back and forth is quite important to I feel to also show. So okay, here you said this should be using the BKE. There's no function for it, so let's just say we do. Keyframe index set should be used instead. Okay, it's a fictional function. This won't work, but at least to show. So now on our branch we can do it again. Git Gui, see our change, stage should change. Now these kind of follow-up commits are generally quite simple in their commit message, because they're meant for a reviewer. So that's now committed. You can see in Git K, it just sits on top of the commit that we already had. Arcanist is smart enough to know that this branch is connected to that patch. So if I do arcdiff now, I again get my editor, and it will show all the commits here, the top line of the commit message. And if there were multiple new commits since the last time I ran arcdiff, you will see a list of them here. I'm fine with this, so I write and quit. And I refresh. You can see here a message with my message, like a new comment on it. And this is done because it now uses that. So I can mark that as done and click on submit. Now, because I did all of this, because it's easier to have only one screen share, because I did this, you don't see the entire thing, but it would flip the status. So when you say request changes, this would go red and show that changes were requested. And then after I do another arcdiff, it would again go back to the gray needs review, so that you as a reviewer know that I made changes. Now, if there is an in-between where I did some changes but not everything yet, I want you to hold off on the re-reviewing. Here in the action, I can say plan changes. And then click on submit, and now it says changes planned, which means the patch is still mine. You don't have to review it quite yet because it's going to change. Now let's say you want to review this. So you don't have my branch. You're on master. What you can do is arc patch instead of arcdiff. Just type this number. Arc patch something. And now you will see that we have a single commit made by me that has one, like it's one commit that has the result of all the commits so far. And then I can build Blender, and I see compile error, and then you can just go in again, so you can look. This function doesn't even exist, and then reject, like ask for more changes, and so you get it back and forth. For now, I will just abandon the revision so that my colleagues don't get confused about what is going on here.
Yes.
Now, let's say, as a final thing, this patch gets accepted. There's a bunch of ways in which you can actually merge it to master. We would not do a branch merge because we want to maintain a linear history for as much as possible. So what I generally do is, first I do a rebase. RBI is my alias for rebase minus I for interactive, on top of master. Then I can see, yeah, this is the commit I want to have. It's now sitting on top of master. Check out master, and I do git commit squash dash. And that dash means the last branch I was at. So it will squash all the commits on that branch together. Right now it's only one branch, but one commit, but maybe it could be more. No. Merge, same story, different command. Git merge squash. And then I can do git commit and get the message. Squashed commits of the following, and then you can just change it around. I also would type the reviewers there so that anybody looking at the commit knows that it was reviewed and by whom. And now I have a commit sitting on top of master that is committed by me. That has all the information in there. It has a link to the differential revision so that people can click there, see all the discussions that went on. And now if I were to push, Blender would break. So I'm going to throw it out before I push this. And that is basically the life cycle of a patch.
Very cool. I'm sure I can circle back with you if it gets to this point. I think we're far away from that at the moment with my coding knowledge. But I think what will be most valuable is to maybe look at existing patches or finding out, like we were talking about before the live stream, just getting into the weeds with the current draw code and yeah, maybe just trying to change a thing here or there just to see a different Blender result, because that's about where I'm at code savvy wise.
I've been Blender developer for years, and I still feel like
Yes,
that's my level.
yeah.
Just
So the other thing is those like quick like commands that you were using. I mean, those are things that obviously I won't have at my disposal. So could we maybe just talk again very high level, like what's the first step for like once you've gone into the C, edit it, the first thing would be to stage your changes in Git.
well, when you're talking about development, like first thing I would do is build Blender and see the results. So, right,
Yeah. Okay.
like which after you made changes,
Yeah.
you wouldn't necessarily commit them to Git. I mean, it just
Or not commit. Okay. I see what you're saying. You just would build it. You just would build it with your changes, and then yeah, okay, and then once you've got something that you're happy with, like you've gone through, like we were talking about, printing all of the variables, making changes, making functions, whatever, and then you would go to the Git stage.
yes, like typically I would commit to Git either when I'm done, if it's a simple thing, or when I have a feeling that okay, I'm past a certain threshold. Things are getting a bit more complicated, but the simple thing I wanted to do, I got it working. Then I would definitely commit, like to a local branch. That's all fine. But at least for myself, to have a point where I can go back where it used to work, and if things stop working, I have a diff to investigate to see my changes from a working point to a non-working point.
Yes.
And that is what I use Git for, to keep the last working point as close to the non-working point as possible.
I see. And for the work that I'll be doing, knowing what you know about what I'm trying to create, it seems like I'll be all in that space underscore graph part of the code. There's nothing else. I mean, all of the like active F curve, active keyframe, that's all within that folder.
The drawing of that is in there.
Okay, the operators are
But
the other part of it.
Yeah, like here now, the keyframe edit is what had the select budget add function.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is an editor's animation. So that has a lot of, like the editor's module, subdirectory has a lot of the operators, the things you interact with in Blender. I do feel that for animation, it has a little bit too much.
Okay.
Like also inserting a keyframe is on the editor level, and I feel that should be moved into the kernel level. But like I have some ideas to move, like to move lots of the animation code out of Blend kernel even into its own module, so that it's more on one level and it's easier to grasp what is all concerning animation, because right now it's all over the place. One more thing we can do is look at a debugging session.
Sure, that'd be very helpful.
I thought as much. So for that, we have the Run and Debug tab here, where I have a whole bunch of things. Main target, of course, is Blender. So let's take a look there. I think this is fairly default for standard configuration. So if you click the play button, you have nothing. Then Visual Studio Code suggests, should I add something? Or yeah, also have a button here, add configuration. So most of this config comes from there. So the name you can give yourself, the type is CPP debug. Program points at my debug build. That arguments -T1, which sets the thread count to 1, which is kind of useful for debugging, and -- open last, because why not? And the pre-launch task is build debug. and I have that configured somewhere, but I will just look up my, there you go, my blog, because I also documented this. So if you want to copy it from my blog, I've posted the URL in the chat, because this configures how to run a build release and a build debug.
That's handy,
so I can now also press F4 in Visual Studio Code and have the build debug, build release, build tidy with Clang tidy. And this debugger configuration, before it launches it first runs build debug, so that I'm sure that like I always run the latest version of Blender with my changes and not some older build. So what we can do is just set a breakpoint there, press F5, and now it should take a while to actually build Blender, because I haven't done a debug build in a while. In the meantime, I'm scrolling through the chat to see if there's any questions. No, just people chatting about freaking out. That's fine. Do you think Meta's involvement is just to help make cycles better, or do you think they just want Blender for themselves? Well, I'm sure they want Blender. Everybody wants Blender. But they're not getting it.
There was a question, Sybren, from Filippo Rossoni, I think. How I can choose the reviewer, the module owner?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, module owner is a safe bet. Also on the wiki, we have a list of modules. If it wants to respond, there we go. So on the wiki, you can go to modules. This gives you the list of modules. If you're talking about module owners, you probably know it, but I just wanted to show it for everybody. So the module owner is usually a safe bet, but you can also look at like the table underneath, which shows a bit more of the specific areas of developers. So for example, Brecht knows a lot about the inverse kinematic system. Let's look at some other, like Transform and Snap, then Campbell or Germano or your guys. So that can also help. Like if you're submitting a patch in one of those areas, you can just pick somebody from that list. If you're unsure, you can even leave out the reviewers as long as you tag with the right module, because then it will show up on the list of that module. People will actually look at it. Without these tags, it's very invisible. I see from Dan, why not debug build as the usual / most common build? Because it takes longer. It creates bigger executables. It adds a lot, some extra checks. So what we can do is do BLI assert. For example, handles visible is not 4, which is kind of a safe assertion to make because it's a Boolean. All of these statements are conditional, so based on the type of build. So on a release build, this line will be entirely removed. On a debug build, it will crash Blender when this assertion is false. So you can also do assert message with Boolean should not be 4, and then it will crash with that message and with the indication of where in the file the assertion failed. So that's why. That also slows down Blender, and there's also other extra checks that go only into debug builds to help you debug. For debug builds, though, we do have ASAN, which is the address sanitizer, which is super useful for finding these hard to find bugs like freeing memory twice, or accessing memory after it's been freed, or just going out of bounds of the allocated memory. And that's also what's enabled. If you have that enabled in your build options, that's also running with Blender. So that will also slow down the execution speed of Blender. So active development in the area of physics like fluid. Yeah, I think Sebastian Barskis is still working on some fluid simulation. He no longer works at the Blender office though, so I don't have eyes on it. There are talks about adding an interactive mode to Blender, but that is still in the talking about it phase. We do really want to have an interactive mode, which means physics time being disconnected from scene time. So you can pause the scene, put a bunch of bricks in the air, hit the play physics button, and then everything falls and bounces, etc. And then once it settles, you stop the physics, and then you have just a physically accurate pile of bricks. But it doesn't necessarily mean you have to actually change the current frame of the scene. Those kind of things.
This debug build is really intense to build.
It is, and also
Yeah.
I didn't double check the options that I'm using. So because it's in a different directory, it has its own CMake configuration. So it could have included a bit more than we had in the release build.
So that is one thing that I tried building Blender on my Mac, and there were all of these build errors, and I have no idea where to go with those errors, because you know what I mean. They can be there can be so many of them. You know, like which one is the one that's
First one.
Yeah, it's always the first one. Okay.
Yeah. No, like but honestly, like especially with compiler errors,
Yes.
the first one can be the cause of all the other ones. Like
Yes.
if you miss a semicolon somewhere, and that could mean that some type declaration was misinterpreted, which then later causes all kinds of errors about that type, because Blender doesn't, like the compiler doesn't know about it. So I would always suggest like the first one, and sometimes I even tell the build tool to do a single build at a time, so that it doesn't build 500 things simultaneously, but just the one, so that I can see which one actually fails first.
Makes sense.
Let's do a test. Yay! As you can see, I did a box select, and as soon as I release the button, it stops here, and
Cool.
you can see the info that we were looking at. You can see that the current index is 2, and here you can see the whole call stack, from the main function to the window manager main to doing the operator call to the graph keys box select execute function. And then, well, this is familiar code. We just looked into it. That whole. This I also use a lot. Like sometimes you can easily find the function that does what you need, or that does what you need to change, but you have no idea how it gets called in the greater scheme of things. And then just setting a breakpoint and watching the call stack is really helpful.
So the next time you build this debug build, it'll go much faster?
Oh yeah. Like if I make a change here, hello YouTube, make the YouTube red. There we go. Press F5. Compiling is done. It's now linking. It does take longer than a release mode link, but. and how the linking
And
is done is running.
Sybren, when you would gone to type into something, I don't know what it was, like a target or something like that. What was that to get this to? Maybe it was for the syntax highlighting that you did.
Did I do
There was
anything?
something that you. Yeah, I thought you typed into something. It's something I'm used to seeing in Visual Studio Code. Okay, so yeah, that was faster.
Yeah. And I think unit testing was still on, which I disabled for the release build. Because I usually turn those off until I'm actually going to run the test. But there was something I was typing somewhere.
Oh, right, yeah. I'm drawing a blank on which view it's in, but something where there's like this long list of targets. Let me see if I can find it.
Oh yeah, you mean
Like if you click on
this
run.
friend.
Oh, sorry.
This friend.
Which one?
Like this list?
No, not that.
Or
You see that, like for example, if you
list?
go to that runs. No, you see the run C test down at the bottom, at the bottom of the screen, that in the blue bar. Yeah, that dial or that field. But it just seems like there's like a ton of targets. I wouldn't even know which to choose for that. Like maybe it's not that one. It's that play button next to it. Like for example, or at least, let me see if I can find
Launch the selected target. That is probably this list then, like the tasks.
Yeah.
Oh no, I
know,
never use these buttons. Like I.
Okay. Yeah. It's in.
Oh
it's
right.
in that field, yeah.
These guys. Yeah. Blender. Just use Blender. Blender Thumbnailer is an executable that can that other software can use to extract the thumbnail from a blend file. So if you want to have a file browser that supports Blender files with thumbnails, you could make a wrapper for that. The data table of contents, I suggest I think that's for the documentation. Makes DNA and makes RNA are the programs that actually analyze Blender's code and generate the DNA and the RNA stuff. And DNA is what's stored in the blend file, and the RNA is how it's accessed by the animation system
Python,
and by Python. Message format, I don't know. And the SMA area text, I have no clue. Like I never use these. Just Blender.
Yeah, so I guess I just, sometimes you see like a list, and not just here, the launch targets, but there was other parts of Visual Studio Code, and it's just like this long list. I'm like, how do I even choose, from these lists?
Don't. Like, but like joking aside, I would try and get things running from the command line first, always.
Okay.
So that would mean
within Visual Studio Code, you mean you're creating a new terminal?
No.
No, from the command line. Okay.
Yeah. Just from your build directory, make sure that you can run the builder.
Okay.
Make sure that this actually contains Blender after you run it, run the builder.
Yeah.
Make sure that you can run that executable, because that, for me at least, that will give me more confidence that what is on my system is working. And then it's a matter of convincing Visual Studio Code to do the same thing I already know works.
Yeah.
And that just reduces the problem by a whole lot. Another thing that I want to show as part of my personal setup, you can see here that I have a whole bunch of symlinks. And all of them point to the Blender/release directory in the source code. And that is because without this symlink, Python will not be able to find its own scripts. So normally, when you do make install or Ninja install, or you run in Visual Studio, you run the install target, it would copy files into there. But I don't want to run that install command all the time, especially when I'm working on the Python code. I don't want to change that Python code and then run install every time. So that is why I just made it into a symlink. You have to run make install once. It will copy some useless stuff into your source directory that you have to be careful about not committing. But apart from that, it works quite well. I see a bunch of questions. So if you're on Windows, say, what's the best daily build recommended? I don't know. Yeah. Visual Studio, I guess. Will it ever be feasible to create new outliner display mode with a Python add-on? Yeah, it's like a sore thumb kind of thing. The outliner is entirely made in C because it needs to process quite a lot of data and do it quickly. So that's why it's not like the other editors that you can just extend with Python. So will it ever be feasible? Well, for a mathematical concept of ever, yes. Ever soon, I don't expect so. What is the best way to use make update and make release with a custom patch in between? Good question. Do we in sync with master current branch while still applying custom edits? What I typically do is usually I would it depends on whether that branch, that personal branch, lives on git.blender.org. Because if that is the case, you just create the branch and then you're not allowed to do a force push because that messes up people's way of interacting. This becomes harder to follow what's going on exactly. So then I would just do a regular update of master and do a merge of the master branch into my personal branch pretty much every time before I start working on it. So at least once a day. On the other hand, if it's a private branch or I've pushed it to my personal GitLab account where nobody else is looking at it or is looking at it on their own risk, I would rebase it on top of master. So I would use Git RBI, which is my alias for rebase interactive on top of master, and just check out master with my shortcuts or just do a make update or whatnot. And then go back to my personal branch, rebase it again on top of master so that I keep having like this linear small branch that sits on top of the master branch. That's how I would do it.
Okay, so Sybren, was there anything else that you wanted to cover in this live stream?
No, I think we covered quite a bit. Then pray you have no merge
Yeah.
conflicts.
I mean, I think I'm probably gonna have to watch this video again in slow motion because I definitely was seeing a lot of things that I either didn't understand or was no, I'm gonna have to tinker with myself to get, no pun intended.
Yeah. No, of course. And yeah, it's always guessing where to go, how to go about it. But I think before the stream started, you mentioned something that I also want to repeat now. That was a tip: look for the tooltip. So if you can find the tooltip in the source code, you have an entry point to what it's called. That thing is called in C, or whether it's defined in C or in Python. So it can give a nice starting point. And then, of course, we've seen the one where we look at the operator and just remove the b.opt, and the remaining point you change into _ot_, and then you get the name by which it's defined in C code or in Python code that uses the official naming standard. And from there, it's easy.
Okay. Yeah. It's been super useful to see, though. I mean, I feel like, yeah, it is definitely a high-level overview of the process. Yeah, I think I'm going to have to play around. I think the most difficult thing to navigate will be the difference between selected and active keyframes and the context of that. Like, how do you make changes to multiple keyframes when there's one active keyframe?
Yeah, and how do you ensure that that active keyframe is what you expect it to be?
Yes.
And then what others also expect it to be, because that's always nice guesswork as well.
So in my Python add-on, I'm polling to see what keyframes, or when there are keyframes selected, show this panel. Is that something feasible or not? Would that be too many? Things to add to, whatever, a draw call or something. What I'm talking out of my ass. I don't know, but what, you know what I'm saying? Would that be too much activity? You know what I mean? Checking for.
It depends. Like I've done Python code that draws stuff on the VSE, for example, the video sequence editor, to get extra information in there. It may get a bit tricky to do that with keyframes, because indeed it can be a lot. There can be thousands and thousands of keyframes on the screen.
Right.
So yeah, but maybe we can think of a way to I don't know, to hook some callbacks for just the selected ones or just the active one.
Exactly. Exactly.
And that should be relatively fast.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what would you, I mean, without getting into the code, what would you suggest as being like a place to start with that? Like, what would be a good thing a hook to look into or something like that, like in drawing the graph editor?
I would say start with a very concrete thing to do with it, like that you have a concrete goal to work towards, and then see what makes it possible. Because like going the other way and trying to see what you can expose to Python, I don't think it'll necessarily produce the best API.
Yeah.
And then specifically, I've only used the draw callbacks, and they've changed a bit since we moved away from the immediate mode and more towards shaders running on the GPU. So maybe things, I would have to dive into it myself as well to figure out what's really the best way of doing things.
Okay, it looks like Christoph said something. Let's see. Suggestion for learning drawing from experience. I don't know. I know, Christoph, you've worked in this area before, so maybe you do know something. Okay. Do you see that, Sybren, in the chat?
Yeah, do something that's similar to something that already exists, and then copy code around, see where it breaks. Yeah. It's, that helps a lot. So like if you're really interested in hooking Python up to the drawing code, I would suggest looking at existing add-ons that do this. The one I'm familiar with is the Blender Cloud add-on, because I wrote that myself. And there I have a bunch of drawing code for that register shaders, and then the only thing Python really has to do is put the data into a buffer that gets sent to the GPU, and then stuff gets drawn. But indeed, looping over all the F-curves and all the keyframes in order to, you don't have to find the active one. You only have to loop over the F-curves themselves to find the active F-curve with the active key. So it shouldn't be too hard to do in Python. I mean, you won't get that many F-curves shown in the graph.
Yeah. I mean, in the prototype that I have now, I've been able to like I was telling you, but use polling to get the active keyframes. I just wanted to, start wrapping my mind around how to do these things in C so they're done properly. Like because I think an add-on it seems a little bit since it's like way down the line, in being run as a script, it seems like it would be hard to go the other direction, like where you're taking a Python script and then replicating it line for line in C.
Yeah. It's probably better to...
I think Christoph's advice was good. Yeah, or just to...
I would say, like, if building a prototype in Python to show ideas, and then that is like so much more important than the eventual implementation, because like really developing the ideas and developing the methodology to make sure things work as people expect and work well, I think that is the most of the work. And then moving, once these ideas are fleshed out and everything is really crystal clear about how it should behave, then moving that into C code, like that's fairly easy.
So would in that way would I then create a design task perhaps with the add-on included, and then you guys weigh in on how I might go about porting it to C? Okay.
Yeah, because like,
and I'm already ready for that. Yeah, because I've been thinking about how am I going to make this into C, and I think that's going to take me years to do because I'm so new to this.
Of course, that's fine.
Yeah.
I think this, like the way we are talking about this now, is also a great example of how to get changes into Blender.
Yes.
I think talking about it, like, and whether it's like a virtual face-to-face discussion or just on Blender chat in text. But I think talking about it is really important, especially to get things approved on a very broad conceptual level. Is important.
Okay. Then I guess next steps would be just I'll maybe send the add-on to the animation module.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's to have it in an add-on would be great, because then we can just toy around with it, and everybody says, "Oh, this works so much better," and then we just go for it and do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes me feel good, because I feel like when the prototype exists and you can see the functionality and play with it, then everybody kind of is on the same page about what the end goal is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like storytelling, like show, don't tell.
Yes. Okay. Great. Well, I don't know if any other questions are in the chat, but I'm definitely good as far as next steps.
Good. Then I think we've had a great live stream.
I definitely appreciate you taking the time to do this, Sybren. I know you're a busy man.
It's fun, and I think it's something that interests more people. So thanks for the question and for the motivation.
Yeah, well, hope this wasn't too noob to bring yourself back to.
Nah.
Yeah, okay.
Blender can get so complex and so overwhelming that I also feel like a noob sometimes. So.
Yeah, that's good. Well, hey, Arissus.
Hey.
All right. Cool. Okay. Well, Sybren, thank you, and I'll see you on the chat.
Yep. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and
thanks.
See you next time.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Bye.